Today is July 9th, 2020. My name is Cristian Doña Rebeco. I am interviewing Dulce Sherman for the Conversaciones Oral History Project, Voces of a Pandemic project at the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies and Chris Library at UNO. This project is in partnership with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Ms. Sherman, that this interview will be placed at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Dr. C.C. and Mabel L. Chris Library, and share with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record your consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 6 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are several questions we need to make sure you agree before we go on. The Office of Latino and Latin American Studies and Chris Library wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at UNO's Dr. C.C. and Mabel L. Chris Library. UNO's Chris Library will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials to donate to the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. First question. Do you give the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies consent to archive your interview and your materials at UNO's Chris Library?
Yes.
Do you grant UNO Chris Library right, title, and interest in copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes.
Do you agree to allow UNO's Chris Library to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes.
Do you grant the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies consent to share your interview and your materials with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for inclusion in the Voces of a Pandemic Oral History mini project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
Yes.
Thank you. We have many questions in the pre-interview form that we have already filled out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server at the University of Texas at Austin. Before Voces sends it to the Benson Library and to the Chris Library, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members so that it will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library and Chris Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researcher at the Benson?
Yes, that's fine.
Finally, on occasion, the Office of Latino and Latin American Studies and Voces receive requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Yes.
Thank you, Dulce.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now we start with the interview itself. If you have any stories or anecdotes, examples that you wish to share, please do so. And it's important to give context and to provide more information for your answers. So as a way of introduction, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Were your parents born? When they came to the U.S.? What do you do?
So I am a firstborn generation, born in Grand Island, Nebraska, from parents that were immigrants from Mexico. They came in the mid-30s, and my dad was a minister and my mother was a stay-at-home mom. My mom did not speak English. She did not drive. She did not finish grade school. We were one of 3 families in a very small town called Minden, Nebraska, about 2,000 people in Minden. So we were a pretty poor family. There was a total of 8 of us, and we lived in a 2-bedroom home. So I often tell the story of we slept in a hideaway bed, and then I had a brother that had a hideaway bed, and we all slept in the living room. So we didn't have a very rich upbringing, but I think that's also something that I will never forget in terms of being a part of the community. With respect to my professional background, I have an undergraduate degree in human resources management. I have a master's degree in business. Also a graduate level certificate from the Fielding Institute for Organizational Development. I have about 25 years of progressive human resources leadership experience, and most recently, predominantly working in the for-profit industries, and then in the last 10 years, shifting to the nonprofit industries. Recently, I'm working in a dual role right now where I work part-time as a chief operating officer for a small nonprofit that focuses on food insecurity. And then I also decided to open up my small business, which is Sherman Executive Consulting, which focuses on helping small business owners, predominantly in the nonprofit sector.
Tell me a little bit, how did you ended up working in human rights, sorry, in human resources? Did your brothers, your sisters, did they help you, your parents?
I will tell you about a story that really motivated me to be in human resources. I remember very young, my mom not speaking English, and she had her very first job out of the home, and she did not speak English, and she came home one day upset and crying and telling me that she was going to lose her job. And I said, you know, Mom, what's wrong? And she says, I'm going to lose my job because I have to learn how to read and write in English. And I said to her, well, why is that? You wash dishes, you work in the kitchen. That's not a requirement for you to do that. And so I remember calling her employer and telling them that that was illegal, and we would definitely make some changes and call other people if they made that a requirement. And so from that day, I felt really empowered to help my mom. And then I realized that there's probably other people out there that are probably feeling the same way. And, you know, human resources and organization is really there to not only represent the organization, but also to represent employee rights. So you're using that balancing act and ensuring that you're representing both parties.
Great, that's a wonderful story. Thank you. And you, from our conversations before, and from what I know you, you have a strong role in the Latino community and the Latino nonprofit environment. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do there and how you got involved in working with Latino nonprofits?
Well, I really wanted to be in a role where I could leverage my bilingual skills in Spanish. I moved to a nonprofit, which was a healthcare facility, and predominantly the constituents were Latino as well as employees, about 80%, 85%. From there, I really noticed that there was a need for more involvement, so I became involved with the Latino Center of the Midlands Board, and recently took over the president role for the board, as well as the Worker Center board. And for me, it's really about thinking about people like my parents that didn't have, being in a small town, they didn't have access to resources like the Latino Center or Heartland Worker Center. My father worked in the plant in addition to being a minister, and then my mom worked outside the home later in life, and again, didn't really have the resources like the Latino Center. If you think about the programs that they provide for youth and for families, my mom could have benefited from having an organization like that to have other women to talk to. I imagine she probably had a very lonely life not having other Latina women to speak to. So that has propelled me, and it seems like once you get involved with the community, then it starts to, there's a lot of interconnection. Even in my small business, I've realized that the nonprofits all have an intersection. So the Latino Center works with several clients that I work with the Siembra Nebraska program, where they're fostering an internship program for young Latinos to learn the ropes of what it is to own a business, or from the food insecurity aspect, they're teaching them how to grow. And that's partnering with several Latino businesses in South Omaha.
Wonderful, thanks. We're going to move to talk about COVID-19 directly, but later we're going to come back to your work and in your own business and with the Latino nations. So tell me a little bit about, when did you first learn about COVID-19? And was it through radio, through the TV, through your own children? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the family we were planning to be traveling. And so I had been keeping track of, just in general, what has been happening in the world. And come March, we noticed that the borders were closed very quickly. And prior to that, avid news watcher, liked to read periodicals. I had read about the pandemic that started in overseas, and I noticed how quickly the numbers were increasing, and it was scary to see how quickly they were increasing. And subsequently, our trip was canceled because we weren't able to go out of the country. And so to me, that's when I really, because I kept on looking at the websites at the air control in terms of traveling, and I found out prior to it being published that they were closing the borders. So I knew that it was a serious situation for our country.
And you mentioned that, you know, it was scary. Was that your initial reaction? Or was it, did you have another reaction?
No, I was very concerned, because what was alarming to me was that you saw so many cases, and then you would see the news again, and it would be, I remember telling my family this, I said, this is increasing too quickly across our United States. That's worrisome. And I remember my family saying, oh, it's fine. And I said, no, this is something different, because it's increasing and it's spreading across the United States too quickly in several countries. So that was alarming to me. And plus, I still keep in contact with a lot of the people that I work with in healthcare. And what I was hearing from them as well was an alarming concern that this was happening too quickly.
Yes. And you live with your husband, and you have 4 children, right? Can you remind me their ages, please?
Yes, so 33, 30, 21, and then I have a 20-year-old.
And do they all live in Omaha or near you?
I have one that lives in Lincoln that's attending school, and then the rest are here in Omaha.
So, but is there any one of them living with you in the house?
Yes, the youngest is still at home with us, and the college student when he comes home.
So tell me a little bit, how has been that interaction with them now that we are in this new world of COVID-19? Do you visit them? How do you see the impacts on them? Have you talked to them about this?
Absolutely. When everything started happening, the whole travel trip being postponed, we all got together as a family and discussed the importance of social distancing, ensuring that they were washing their hands, using a mask. In fact, my second oldest son just had a baby, and so we immediately talked about how we would not see each other because of this, because we wanted to protect our grandson. And even our youngest 2 sons, we reminded them to social distance, not to be with other people that they weren't certain where they had been, and if they were, to wear a mask and be cautious around other people. The idea was that we really wanted to protect, especially my husband's parents, who are elderly. We kept our distance from them as well too, and immediately what we started doing was we started having Zoom meetings with our families, so that we could talk to each other. Even my sisters that are from out of state, we were able to have conversations with them. And so we knew right away that we needed to stock up on necessity items, and really make us kind of a safety plan for our family.
What's that safety plan? What does it look like?
Having enough food without being selfish about it, as well as cleaning supplies without hoarding, saving for other people, alerting others. I immediately, when this happened as an HR professional, I was starting to hear people were losing their jobs. And so I immediately started offering people. I remember one company said, hey, we need workers and we need bilingual workers. So I remember vividly at, I think it was like 1:30 in the morning posting. And immediately I started getting messages from people saying, I need a job, I need a job. So I sent the information on to the company. And so I kind of went into this mode where I needed to help people. So wherever there was food drives, I would post it or communicate. Whoever needed food, we'd try to communicate within those networks to say, hey, this is where you need to go, or I can help you. If you need food, I can pick it up for you. Cleaning supplies, it was just kind of you just kind of went into that mode right away to want to help people and the family. And that was part of, you know, the whole plan of discussion and what we were going to do as a family.
That's great. And it's so fantastic that you have the connections to be able to participate and engage in that help. Do you have any contact with family members that might still be in Mexico, or there's all the families here?
No, we still have relatives in Mexico.
Have you been in touch with them in this context?
Yes, very minimal. It was very early when the pandemic started, and the the attitude, and we talked to a couple other friends that we knew from there. The attitude was that they didn't want anyone from the United States to come to Mexico, which I thought was interesting because it was vice versa here. You know, you've been hearing all these stories of you don't want anyone from Mexico to come into the United States. Well, now the tables were turned, that they didn't want the United States to come in, and subsequently the borders were closed, that you can't travel to Mexico or back and forth.
And your son, who is studying at Lincoln, did he came back to the house, or is he still living there, or because I assume that he went online with all his classes?
Yeah, so last year when this happened, we were originally told that he was going to be able to live in the residence house that he was in. And within a matter of days, he called us and says, I have to move out by Sunday, because they're going to move all the students in one building on the campus. And so we had to scurry very quickly to get him moved out and out by that. I think we found out Wednesday, Thursday, and then we had to have him out by Sunday. So we moved him out. He lived at home and decided to move back to Lincoln into an apartment and out of the housing. So we moved him back. It was like a month later because he had already arranged his apartment. But during that time, he lived with us. And so now that he's living in Lincoln, for example, we just saw him this last week. We quarantine ourselves 14 days from the time that we see him, because he's probably exposed to more people than any of us right now. And so we're just very careful as a family.
So going back to your work in the community with organizations in the community, you're part of several boards and you participate in several important nonprofit in the community. How have you seen the role of those organizations in the current context of COVID-19?
They have been front hand in terms of their working with the people that really need the work. And so I think it's been really, I admire the courage of the nonprofits, because they had to quickly deploy their employees to help the people in need. And not really knowing in the context of how to keep their employees safe. COVID has been kind of an evolving disease that you really don't know what it's going to do. And today, it's still not knowing what the impact, long-term impact is. But the ability to keep your employees safe has been challenging, to educate them on how to keep them safe, communicating with them, determining whether you needed to keep your facility open or not, or just have bare minimum resources to continue those services, and really recreating yourself as a nonprofit, and still having to worry about your funding. Because a huge thing with the nonprofits that I work with, every one of them had to worry about their sourcing and their funding, where their donors going to continue. Because if you recall, the stock market took a big crash and it impacted a lot of nonprofits, their funding. So they had to really had to bare minimum expenses and then go back to their donors and say, are you still going to give us money? And if not, what services do we need to do to change ourselves? So for example, the small nonprofit that I work for, they had to quickly reassess the services that they provided to the community, which I see that happening with all the nonprofits that I'm working with. And most of them are direct services, the basic needs. So food security, education of how to stay safe, how to get access to masks, changing their policies, communicating to employees very quickly. When the CARES Act was put in place, the requirement of any employer with 500 or less employees, they had to pay them sick time if they, had COVID. So all those things that they had to quickly come up to speed, in addition to the SBA loans that were being offered in that small window that they had to apply for those loans during that time frame.
You work directly with a nonprofit that is engaged in food security. That is something that, and you're creating a city garden or a city orchard in South Omaha, if I'm not mistaken, right?
So the small nonprofit that I work for, they're working more with logistics in terms of delivering food to those that are high risk. However, I'm the president for the Latino Center of the Midlands, and the Latino Center of the Midlands has a program called Siembra Nebraska, and they are coordinating their efforts with some of the South Omaha businesses to create a community garden in that area for the residents.
And in the case of the logistic of distributing food, your nonprofit, how has it changed? How has it been impacted by this?
It has increased the need for logistics. So for example, there is a food pharmacy program where, and this is what I'm seeing with all the nonprofits, is they've had to recreate how they provide services. Okay. Rather than the residents coming to them, it's bringing services to them, whether it's bringing food, whether it's providing education via video now, via Zoom, which we're seeing a lot, or distributing boxed meals to them, or fresh fruits and vegetables. The Latino Center is a really good example where they do cooking demos live so their residents or their families can view it. There's meals that are being delivered, but it's also coordinating with several other community agencies that have identified high-risk individuals that need access to food. The Intercultural Senior Center is another good example where they have a food bank that also delivers food to elderly people that cannot get to the center.
Mm-hmm.
And
And sorry.
one thing I will say too is the Latino Center did a survey really early, and they were one of the first agencies that really set the tone for closing their organization. I know that when I talked to the ED Albert Vadas, we were talking about whether we should close or not, and should we wait to close. And at that moment, it was really important for us to decide that we would set the tone for the Latino Center, the Latino community, that we wanted to take care of the Latino community and not wait for others to tell us when we should close, but be a leader in closing and reevaluating how we would provide services to the families that were being serviced.
Mm-hmm. And since you participate in a lot of organizations, the Latino Center One, the nonprofit that you work with directly, and others, how have you observed the impact of COVID-19 in the Latino community in Omaha itself? So not in the organizations, but in the people. Was it? We know that there is Latinos have been impacted greatly. What was happening in South Omaha between March and now? Has it increased? Has it changed? How have you seen it?
So I am part of a group that's called Solidarity, and it's a group that was started in the rural area of Nebraska. It's advocating for the meat packers that are working in the plants that have been impacted by COVID-19. There's been a huge sense of urgency to continue communicating to the South Omaha community, because you continue to see families not taking precautions, social distancing, using masks, ensuring that they're not congregating in large groups. Right now, from what I understand, the last statistics that I did see for South Omaha was 60% positive for COVID cases, which is alarmingly high for Latino groups. And it's really impacting the marginalized communities of not only Omaha, but the entire nation. So you're really seeing the disparity in healthcare access and the impact that it has, and the trickling effect. When we talk about food insecurity, it starts, with children going without healthy foods, or living in food desert areas that don't have access to healthy foods, and parents that may not have employment able to provide healthy foods to their families. The health outcomes that happen as a result of the lack of income and lack of access to healthcare. So it's a domino effect when you think about it, and COVID is really showing those outcomes.
Yes, it's very distressful in how we are seeing even more visible this disparities in access to everything. You mentioned earlier in this part that some of the Latino community, we're not social distancing, we're not taking care. What is your analysis of that? Is it because they didn't think it was a highly contagious and dangerous disease, or is it because they didn't have the chance of not doing social distancing because of work or because of other things?
I think it's a combination of both. I think it's a lack of education of really understanding that this is a serious disease. And the second is that the reality is a lot of the Latino community are in essential working positions. They also operate small businesses, and in order to continue their living, they have to be in those situations. So they really have not much of a choice to be able to say that I can stay home and work from home. And, I think about the small business loans. I saw on the news the other day here locally that a lot of the small businesses in Omaha did not apply for small business loans. And so what does that say about did they know that they could apply for COVID loans to help their businesses so that they wouldn't feel like they had to be in their business and putting themselves at risk.
Thanks. Now, this is a great segue to my next set of questions that are related to the work that you do directly, because your work, besides the one with nonprofit, is in your business, in your own small consulting office, is working with human resources in small Latino and other companies. Tell me a little bit about how COVID impacted your work with these organizations. You mentioned at some point that you started this in January, this new activity, and then everything came, right?
Yeah, so my role went part-time, my nonprofit role went part-time in January. At that time, I decided I wanted to open up Sherman Executive Consulting. And the idea behind that business was I saw a need for smaller nonprofits where the leader oftentimes wears multiple hats, and HR is one of them. I could come in and help them, and then they could focus on the growth and the strategy of the organization. And so when COVID hit, the dynamics really changed because first of all, I assumed that my work would diminish, but it was opposite. I was contacted by several wanting to have help on how do we communicate to our employees. What do we do? You know, the CARES Act is coming into place. How do we put this in place? And then the Black Lives Matter movement also, how do we communicate this to our employees? So looking at procedures and policies and having real-time communication with employees became very critical for most of the employees that I'm working with. So again, it's that having to be very fluid as an organization, even as a nonprofit with all the regulations that they need to comply with, being fluid and flexible enough to adjust their policies and create even incentives to keep people to come to work, because a lot of the nonprofits are working with people that need the help. They couldn't afford not to have people in place.
And you're working only with nonprofit or also with for-profit small businesses?
Right now, my focus has only been working with nonprofits, and my heart is really in working with the nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Now, and can you tell me a little bit, because we talked before that your son is working for the census at this moment. How have you seen that important task change in the current conditions?
So he was supposed to start in January, and he started later January, had a couple trainings, and then when the pandemic hit, I remember it was almost like everything happened all at once. My husband works for a large company. They had a COVID case, and they immediately shut down this huge organization. And in a matter of time, they redeployed thousands of people to work online. My son came home that day and he says, I don't know if I have a job anymore. I think the job's going to change. And he brought this huge big box of materials he had to read. He was given a laptop and a phone that he needed to quickly study. And I think he had about a week training. And then he said to us, they're going to halt the census for right now until we know what's going to happen. And so his work essentially was paused. And now he's back at it, and they're doing additional training. He had some online training he needed to complete, and then some additional calls this week. And they're saying that he's going to continue, they're going to continue doing the work. A lot of it has moved online, but they're supposed to be following up with some of the different locations in the next couple months, depending upon how COVID goes.
Right. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about healthcare in your family. Have you anyone in your extended family have had COVID-19?
No, no one has had COVID-19 in our family.
Okay. But you also been really careful about your household, because in your family you have people that are higher risk.
Yes, very, very much so. We've been very cautious about it because of the risk, the high risk, older parents, in my immediate family, health conditions that make us high risk. Recently, we do have a family member that was exposed to COVID-19 that was recently tested that we're waiting on results. So as a precaution, we are in quarantine right now as a family.
And in the day-to-day activities regarding health, has anything changed in how you go to the doctor? Have you see how members of your family, get their care?
Yes, so the care has been mostly through telehealth, online, phone calls to the doctor. We immediately stopped going on site to the doctor just because we didn't want to have the risk of any kind of exposure. We limit our visits to the grocery store. If we do, we have masks. We go maybe once a week, once to 2 weeks, and just very organized so that when we go, it's there and very quickly, and we leave and come home.
So we'll hope that this is going to end at some point. How do you see your life being different after this? Are you still going to spend less time going to the store? Are you still going to do a lot of things via online? Are you fine not gathering with some people and just doing it via Zoom? How do you think your life is going to change in the long term, or your family's life?
I would say that it's really forced me to think about what's important. All the meetings and all the organizations that I'm involved in, I'm really reassessing where I really want to spend my time at and what's important. And really the thought process of, we spend a lot of time running from place to place, and really it's been proven that we don't have to do that anymore. We can have a meeting through a Zoom meeting like this, and to really question whether there's a value in meeting. Is that meeting really necessary versus just a simple phone call? It's also forced me and others that I talk to recreate what my new reality is. So the opportunity to have a small business, open a small business, and being able to branch out and talk to people about the need of having a small business has really been a great opportunity right now, because it allows me to still talk to people. I'm very extroverted. I like to be out in the community, but I'm also able to communicate via different technology or over a conversation, which I think is really interesting, because we have spent a lot of time getting away from having simple conversations with people, and it really forces you to pick up the phone, your cell phone, and talk to them versus using email and not having that face-to-face interaction.
Thank you. And so those are my main questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with me about your experiences with COVID-19 that I have not asked you about?
The only thing I would say is that I think this time is going to be a time for employers to really change the way they have done things in the past. Whether employees, the inflexibility to allow employees to work from home, the reality of mental illness as well, the impact of COVID that it can have on someone that might have that, and being in this situation, it almost does give you appreciation for somebody that may be going through that, because you're kind of sheltered and not around many people. So how are employers going to shift their policies and practices to accommodate employees? The other thing is the space that they currently occupy. I imagine a lot of employers are really reassessing whether there's a need to be occupying big spaces when they have proven that they can get the work done remotely. So is that a cost saving? Is there a way for us to think about ways to how we do business? Do we have to be in one place to have or conduct business? And then the other thing too, that I think about too, with everything that is happening with the Black Lives Matter movement, is bringing that topic of diversity, the race and equity to the front line, and everything else that is happening. How are employers really looking at their policies to ensure that they're truly living the race and equity and addressing it? Are organizations diverse at the top? A lot of the nonprofits, are they showing diversity at the top, especially when their constituents come from marginalized communities? Those questions really need to be answered. There's some tough scouring that needs to be viewed in a lot of organizations. We can have diversity programs, but if they're not living them, how can they change their policies and practices to make sure that they are authentic in those programs?
So thank you very much. That's a very interesting way of concluding the interview. I think I agree that there's the Black Lives movement and COVID-19 have actually intersected in a way that are showing us the need to be more open and more strict, even in including all minorities in everything.
In everything. Well, especially since our demographics are changing. What I think last year I heard, 25, 30% by 2030, we're going to see more Latinos. We're going to see more different demographics. And so what are we doing? And the thing that's alarming to me too is the majority of the minorities are not going to be in leadership roles, or they're going to be, their livable wages are not going to be very high. So again, what are we as a community and organizations doing to ensure that marginalized communities, people from different communities, are moved up very quickly in the career path so they have that opportunity, and we change how that looks?
Great. Thank you very much, Dulce, for this interview. And that's it. I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you.